Have you ever felt a desire so deep, so strange, that you questioned whether it even belonged to you? Not a desire for love, not even for sex, but something older, something more primal, a pull from inside you that you've spent your whole life trying to silence. You were never taught how to understand it, only how to hide it. As a child, maybe you felt something stir when no one was watching, a sensation without language, a curiosity you instinctively buried. Maybe someone shamed you. Maybe they punished you. Maybe they just gave you that look, the kind that teaches you something about yourself is wrong. And without realizing it, you began dividing. You built a mask to survive. You pushed parts of yourself underground. But the body remembers what the mind tries to erase. That part of you never vanished. It just went silent, and in that silence, it grew powerful. Carl Jung called it the sexual shadow, the hidden face of desire that doesn't die when you repress it. It waits, and eventually it returns not as fantasy, but as fate. This is the story of what happens when we stop running from that shadow and begin listening to it. There's a part of you that no one knows, a side that doesn't show up in conversations, not even with the people you trust. It doesn't appear on your social media feed. It doesn't have a name, a label, or a role to play. It lives in the pauses, in the silence between your thoughts, in the shadows behind your smile. And you've spent years pretending it isn't there. This hidden self doesn't always feel like a monster. Sometimes it feels like a whisper, soft, familiar, confusing. It surfaces in moments you don't expect, a passing glance, a dream you can't explain, a craving that makes no sense. And when it shows up, you feel it in your body, in your breath, in the tightness of your chest. But instead of turning toward it, you scroll past it. You make a joke. You go back to being you, the version of you that's acceptable, appropriate, manageable. But this version isn't all of you. It's the edited version, the one designed to survive, not to feel. The one trained to behave, not to awaken. Carl Jung believed that what we suppress does not disappear, it waits. And what we call personality is often just a well-rehearsed mask. Beneath it lives the parts of ourselves we buried, not because they were wrong, but because they were too real, too raw, too powerful. And so we learn to hide, to be good, to be safe. But in that safety, something sacred was lost. That lost part is still there. It watches you live a life you've outgrown. It aches when you lie to yourself. It waits in your dreams, in your fantasies, in your shame. And it's not here to destroy you. It's here to return to you. Because wholeness doesn't begin with light. It begins with honesty, the kind of honesty that says, there's more to me than what I've allowed myself to be. And that is where the journey back to yourself truly begins. When we talk about desire, most people think of sex, the physical, the erotic, the visible. But the truth is, the sexual shadow isn't just about sex. It's not about pleasure in the way we've been taught to understand it. It's about something deeper, darker, older, something that speaks the language of the soul long before the body learns how to respond. This shadow isn't aroused by what's pretty or polite. It's stirred by what's forbidden, what's taboo, what lives just beyond the boundaries of control. It's the place where vulnerability meets power, where shame meets curiosity, where fear becomes the doorway to longing. And most of us have been conditioned to run from it, to moralize it, intellectualize it, or wrap it in silence. But that silence is dangerous, because the sexual shadow doesn't vanish when ignored, it festers. It becomes obsession, fixation, anxiety, guilt. It becomes the thing you chase in secret but judge in public. It becomes the story you perform for others while betraying your own truth. Carl Jung never said the sexual shadow was evil. He didn't say it should be erased. He said it should be known. Because buried within that shadow are truths most people are too afraid to face. The desire to surrender, the hunger for control, the need to feel intensity, the fantasy of being fully seen, not through the lens of politeness, but through the raw, unfiltered mirror of instinct. And that's the part we fear the most. Not the physicality of sex, but the emotional nakedness that comes with it. The possibility of being exposed, of losing control, of no longer fitting into the image we've built to be accepted. But if you dare to look closer, you'll see this shadow is not corruption. It's the map to your deepest self. Not because it should be obeyed, but because it should be understood. Because the parts of you you've labeled too much were never the problem. It was the silence around them that created the distortion. What we repress doesn't die, it mutates. You might think you've buried it. The desire, the thought, the memory. You might tell yourself it's gone, that you've moved on, grown up, become stronger. But repression doesn't cleanse the psyche. It only pushes what's unbearable into the basement of the mind. And what lives in that basement never forgets you. Carl Jung warned that anything left in the unconscious will eventually re-emerge, but not as it once was. Repression turns desire into obsession. It twists longing into addiction. It transforms unspoken needs into self-sabotage, emotional numbness, or strange recurring patterns you can't explain. You think you're just unlucky in love or prone to anxiety or tired all the time. But in truth, your shadow is knocking, and the more you ignore it, the louder it becomes. Have you ever stayed in a relationship that drained you even when you knew it wasn't right? Have you ever found yourself chasing something or someone that left you feeling emptier the closer you got? That's not dysfunction. That's disconnection. That's your repressed self trying to claw its way back into your life. And here's the paradox. The harder you try to be good, the more pressure builds underneath. Because the psyche doesn't want perfection, it wants integration. It wants you to stop pretending, to stop performing, to stop dividing yourself into what's acceptable and what's unworthy. Repression creates chaos, not because the shadow is evil, but because it's been exiled. And like anything cast into the dark, it fights to be seen again, even if it has to scream through anxiety, depression, rage, or compulsive behavior. Not because it wants to destroy you, but because it is you, the part you lost in the name of survival. The chaos in your life is not the enemy. It's a message, a map, a signal that something inside you is ready to return. Not to punish you, but to finally bring you home. You've probably asked yourself, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel numb when I should feel close? Why do I pull away just when I want to be held? Why do I chase connection only to run from it the moment it shows up? But the truth is, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're split. At some point in your life, maybe early, maybe so early you don't even remember you were taught that certain parts of you were unacceptable. Maybe your anger wasn't allowed. Maybe your longing was too much. Maybe your sensitivity got laughed at. Maybe your desire made someone uncomfortable. And so, to survive, you made a silent decision. I can't be all of me and still be loved. That was the fracture. From then on, a part of you was pushed away, buried, silenced, covered in shame. Not because you were weak, but because you were wise. The ego builds walls not out of fear, but out of necessity. It learns how to keep you safe in a world that punishes your truth. But those walls come at a cost. You become two people, the one you show to the world and the one who waits in the dark. And while the world may applaud your strength, your composure, your control, your soul feels the split. That's why no amount of success satisfies. That's why love feels like work. That's why you feel hollow in moments that should feel full. You're not too damaged, you're just incomplete. And the part of you that you've labeled sick, sinful, or shameful, that part isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to return. Carl Jung didn't say healing comes from light. He said it begins by making the darkness conscious. The path forward is not about fixing yourself, It's about reuniting with yourself, because the self you abandoned is still waiting, and they don't want to be perfect. They just want to come home. Desire was never the problem. What twisted it into something painful was the silence wrapped around it. When you're young and feel a powerful emotion, a surge of curiosity, longing, or instinct, you don't yet have the words to understand it. You only have the reaction of the people around you. And if that reaction is one of shame, rejection, or quiet withdrawal, your nervous system learns something fast and brutal. This part of me is not okay, so you bury it. You push it down and call it maturity. You suppress it and call it control. You detach from it and call it growth. But buried desire doesn't dissolve, it ferments. It becomes something darker, something unfamiliar. What was once a pure longing to feel, connect, or express begins to twist into something compulsive or obsessive. The desire that could have evolved into intimacy now shows up as fantasy you can't explain, as cravings that embarrass you, as guilt that follows even moments of pleasure. And so begins the cycle. You repress it to feel safe. But the repression makes it feel less safe. Because now it's no longer conscious, it's unconscious. It doesn't respond to reason or logic. It emerges when you least expect it. In the dream that startles you, in the impulse that shocks you, in the shame that arrives after you touch what you thought you wanted. Carl Jung warned that what we do not make conscious becomes fate, but he also taught us that desire itself is not the enemy. Buried desire is. Not because it's evil, but because it no longer has language. And what has no language can only scream in symbols: addiction, avoidance, anger, numbness. What you've been fighting isn't your desire, it's the distortion caused by your exile of it. And when you finally let it speak honestly without judgment, something begins to shift. The noise quiets, the craving softens, because desire doesn't want to control you, it just wants to be seen. You can silence it for a while. You can distract yourself with work, with relationships, with spiritual talk, or endless productivity. You can moralize it, rationalize it, bury it under layers of growth. But the shadow doesn't disappear when ignored, it waits. And it always comes back. Carl Jung warned us with haunting precision, what you do not make conscious will come back as fate. This isn't metaphor. It's a map of the soul. The desires you've pushed away, the cravings, the fantasies, the fears don't just vanish because you've labeled them wrong. They retreat into the dark corners of your psyche and evolve. They become compulsions you can't explain, addictions you can't escape, patterns that keep repeating no matter how much healing you've done. You think it's random, the failed relationships, the impulsive choices, the recurring shame. But it's not. It's your shadow trying to speak to you in the only language it has left, through chaos, through discomfort, through the quiet ache you feel in the middle of your chest when everything else seems fine. The shadow doesn't return to punish you. It returns to complete you. It brings with it the parts you've disowned, your hunger, your intensity, your truth, not to shame you, but to reintegrate you. Because the self you've curated, the composed, stable, healed version of you, is only half the story. And half a life, no matter how beautiful it looks on the surface, always ends in a quiet kind of emptiness. You can try to outrun your shadow, but it walks at the same pace as your soul. Sooner or later, it catches up. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It demands attention. And in that moment, you have a choice. Keep fighting the parts of yourself that are begging to be seen, or finally turn toward them and say, I'm listening. Because until you do, you're not free. You're just managing your fate. You think it's about them, the woman you can't stop thinking about, the man who draws you in and confuses you, the people who trigger something deep and unexplainable inside you. But what if it's not about them at all? Carl Jung taught that the unconscious doesn't simply hide, it projects. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we cast onto others. The traits we suppress become the traits we either idolize or resent. And so, your attraction, your obsession, your judgment, all of it might just be a reflection, not of who they are, but of who you've disowned within yourself. This is the trap of projection. The psyche, in its hunger for wholeness, uses the external world to try and complete itself. You meet someone who expresses freedom, boldness, or vulnerability, and instead of realizing it mirrors a buried part of you, you either chase them with desperation or condemn them with shame. You believe they hold something magical, something forbidden, something powerful, but what you're really chasing is yourself. That's why the emotions are so intense. That's why the desire feels out of proportion, because it's not just attraction, it's longing for reunion with the parts of you you've exiled. And that's also why it hurts. You might try to possess them, save them, fix them, or become them. But no matter how close you get, the ache remains. Because you can't reclaim your wholeness through another person. You have to turn inward. Jung said everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The same is true for everything that mesmerizes us. So ask yourself, what do they express that I've hidden? Is it their confidence, their wildness, their unapologetic need, their comfort with desire? Whatever it is, it lives in you too. You just haven't allowed it to surface. You think it's about them, the woman who captivates you, the man who unsettles you, the person who evokes desire, envy, or even quiet resentment. But it's not. It's about you. It always has been. Carl Jung called it projection, the unconscious process of seeing our rejected traits in someone else. What you admire or despise in others often reflects a part of you you've disowned. So when you feel pulled towards someone with magnetic force, whether through attraction or judgment, pause. Ask yourself, what are they expressing that I've hidden? Maybe it's their freedom, their raw need, their power, their shameless pleasure. Maybe it's their softness, their permission to feel. What stirs you most in others is often a mirror of your own inner exile. This is why projection is such a seductive trap. You chase them not realizing you're chasing lost parts of yourself. You judge them not realizing you're looking into a psychological mirror. And when they leave or fail to heal you or become human in ways you didn't expect, you feel betrayed. Not because they let you down, but because the fantasy collapsed. You can't become whole through someone else's embodiment. You have to reclaim the reflection. You have to say, that's mine. That's me. Only then can the spell break. Only then does the obsession dissolve. Because projection ends not with possession, but with integration. And when you see yourself clearly, you no longer need to chase what you already are. You've spent years building a version of yourself that the world could accept. A version that smiles on cue, speaks carefully, responds the right way, feels only what's appropriate. This version, this persona became your shield, your ticket to belonging, your performance of stability. But deep beneath that performance, something real has gone quiet, something honest, something alive. Carl Jung called this curated identity the persona, the mask we wear to meet society's expectations. But no matter how convincing the mask becomes, it's still a mask. And the more you invest in it, the more distant you become from your own truth. You start to forget how to cry without shame, how to feel, without filtering, how to want, without apologizing. You find yourself smiling at moments that don't feel joyful, nodding in conversations that don't speak to you, being praised for a self that doesn't feel like you at all. This is the cost of a well-kept persona internal exile. And eventually, that split starts to ache. You feel it in the silence after a long day, in the emptiness behind your achievements, in the tension of always holding yourself together. The persona helps you survive, but it can never help you feel whole. Because wholeness isn't about being polished, it's about being real. Your truth may be messy. It may be raw, inconvenient, even misunderstood, but it's yours. And if you want to reclaim the self you buried beneath the performance, you have to take off the mask gently, slowly, bravely, and remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You live in a world that encourages performance but punishes depth. A culture that sells desire but shames the real thing. That teaches you how to curate an image but never how to confront your truth. And beneath all the noise, the algorithms, the filters, the likes, there is a subtle but powerful agenda to keep you disconnected from yourself. Because disconnection is profitable. If you're numb, you'll consume more. If you're confused, you're easier to control. If your deepest needs stay buried, you'll search endlessly for substitutes in products, in partners, in content and chaos. Modern culture doesn't want you integrated. It wants you distracted. It teaches you to sexualize everything, yet never talk honestly about desire. It celebrates empowerment as long as it looks good on camera. It tells you to express yourself, but only in ways that feel safe, sanitized, marketable. And so, you begin to split not just internally, but socially. You show one face to the world and carry your truth like a weight behind your eyes. Carl Jung understood that shadow repression is not just psychological, it's systemic. The more removed you are from your instinct, your body, your honest longings, the more fragmented you become. And that fragmentation feeds an entire economy built on your confusion. But here's what they don't tell you: when you start reconnecting, when you begin to feel deeply, speak honestly, want without shame, you become harder to manipulate. You stop chasing things that numb you. You begin to live from a place of presence, not performance. And in a culture that thrives on your distraction, presence becomes rebellion. Most people aren't tired because they've done too much. They're tired because they've spent years suppressing who they really are. It's not your job, your schedule, or your responsibilities that are draining you. It's the constant inner effort to stay contained, to smile when you want to scream, to nod when you feel invisible, to carry shame silently while performing the role of someone well-adjusted. That kind of suppression is exhausting, not just mentally, but soul-deep. Carl Jung knew this truth before the term burnout was ever popular. He saw that what we call neurosis is often the result of someone avoiding legitimate suffering. The real exhaustion comes not from chaos, but from constantly holding yourself back from truth. From muting your instincts, softening your words, censoring your desire, and living as a fraction of your full self. You tell yourself you're just tired. But you're not. You're weary from the weight of the unlived life. And the tragedy is, you've learned to call this suppression maturity. You've mistaken disconnection for emotional control. You've confused numbness with strength. But your body knows. Your dreams know. That part of you you've silenced. It still remembers how to feel. It still remembers what it means to be alive. You don't need more rest, you need more truth. You need the space to feel what you were never allowed to. You need the freedom to stop performing and start being. Because once the suppression ends, the fatigue begins to lift. And in its place, something else returns: clarity, power, aliveness. Not the kind that comes from caffeine or motivation, but the kind that comes from finally coming home to yourself. Intimacy isn't destroyed by conflict. It's destroyed by absence. Not the kind where someone leaves, the kind where someone stays but no longer shows up. You're in the same room, the same bed, the same routine. But something is missing, something unspoken, something essential. This is what emotional detachment looks like: quiet, invisible, and slowly corrosive. It sneaks into your relationships not with betrayal, but with distance. You touch, but you don't feel. You talk, but you don't connect. You love, or at least you try, but it feels mechanical. And it leaves both people wondering, what happened to us? Carl Jung would say, it's not a problem between two people. It's a fracture within one. When you are divided inside, when parts of you have been disowned, silenced, or exiled, you can't offer wholeness to anyone else. You show up half present, half alive, hoping the other person won't notice. But they do. They feel the gap. They carry the weight of your absence. And over time, they begin to wonder if it's their fault, if they're too much, if they're not enough. But it's not about them. It's about the parts of you you've abandoned in the name of being good, strong, or stable. Real intimacy demands presence, not just physical nearness, but emotional honesty. The willingness to be seen without the mask, to show up with all your contradictions, all your longing, all your shadow, and say, this is me. Because you can't truly love someone from behind a wall, and no one can feel held by a hand that isn't really reaching. We've been taught to see sexual energy as something purely physical, something primal, indulgent, even shameful. But what if we've misunderstood it entirely? What if sexual energy is not just about pleasure or attraction, but about power, creativity, and the very force that animates your existence? Carl Jung saw sexuality as symbolic as archetypal. He understood that this energy, when repressed, doesn't just disappear. It calcifies, it stagnates. And when it has nowhere to go, it doesn't just harm your relationships, it suffocates your spirit. Because sexual energy is life energy. It's the same current that fuels your imagination, your drive, your voice, your vision. It's not just about what happens in the bedroom. It's about how fully you're willing to feel, how willing you are to be moved, to be honest, to be alive in your body. When this energy is blocked, everything else slows down. You procrastinate, you overthink, you shrink, you trade embodiment for performance. You call it discipline, but it's really disconnection. And yet society tells you to manage this energy, to sterilize it, spiritualize it, or sedate it. But what if you were never meant to suppress it? What if you were meant to channel it? When you stop judging this part of yourself, when you allow it to exist without shame, you don't just become more sexual, you become more creative, more awake, more human. You stop chasing stimulation and begin cultivating presence. Because this energy at its core is not about lust, it's about aliveness. And when it flows freely, your life no longer feels like a performance. It feels like art. Most people don't need to be fixed, they need to feel. But feeling is terrifying in a world that taught you to hide. You were conditioned to analyze your pain control. Your impulses manage your image and perform your emotions just enough to appear self-aware. But real healing doesn't come through control, it comes through contact, through allowing what you were told not to feel. Carl Jung knew that the shadow can't be purified by discipline alone. It doesn't respond to moral judgment or self-help rituals. It responds to presence. And that presence begins with a question that most people avoid. What part of myself have I been afraid to feel? Maybe it's grief you never named, desire you never owned, rage you never allowed, longing you buried because it didn't fit your role, your gender, your faith, your story. You called it wrong or ugly or dangerous. You didn't express it, you exiled it. But what we exile doesn't vanish. It hardens. It shows up in our choices, our relationships, our quiet self-betrayals. And the way out isn't to fix yourself, heal faster, or be more enlightened. It's to sit with the part of you you've spent a lifetime avoiding, to witness it without shame, to let it move through you, not to obey it, but to understand it. Integration doesn't mean indulging your shadow. It means holding space for it, not worshiping it, not silencing it, just seeing it fully, deeply, honestly. Because once it's seen, it begins to soften. And what once felt dangerous begins to feel human. The goal was never to be perfect. The goal was to be whole. But somewhere along the way, we confused control with healing. We thought if we could discipline every urge master, every emotion, eliminate every flaw, we'd become free. We turned our inner world into a project, our desires into problems, our shadows into threats, and in doing so, we lost the essence of what it means to be human. Carl Jung taught that wholeness is not about moral superiority, it's about the union of opposites. It's not about light overpowering darkness, but about learning how to hold both the sacred and the messy, the instinct and the insight, the desire and the discipline in the same breath, in the same body. True healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from relationship with yourself. A relationship honest enough to say, yes, I have fear. Yes, I have anger. Yes, I carry longing, grief, desire, contradiction. And none of that makes you broken. It makes you complete. But wholeness requires surrender, not to chaos, but to truth. To stop fragmenting yourself into categories of good and bad, spiritual and impure, worthy and unworthy. You are not here to manage your humanity, you are here to embody it. Because when all parts of you are allowed to exist, when even your shadow is welcomed back into the circle, something shifts. You no longer chase purity. You stand in presence. You stop apologizing for your edges. And you begin to carry your contradictions not as shame, but as power. That is what wholeness really is. You've spent years running from it, the part of you were taught to fear. The part that felt too wild, too needy, too intense, too dark. You tried to silence it with discipline. You tried to outgrow it with self-help. You tried to transcend it with spirituality. But it never went away. That's because your shadow was never trying to hurt you. It was trying to come home. Carl Jung never said the shadow is evil. He said it is unlived life. The parts of you that were silenced, rejected, or punished, they didn't disappear. They waited. And in that waiting, they grew louder. Not out of malice, but out of longing. Because every part of your soul wants to be known, not judged, not fixed, just seen. And when you finally turn to face your shadow, when you stop calling it wrong and start asking it why it's there, something profound happens. The war inside you softens. The noise becomes a whisper, and the part of you feared most begins to reveal its truth. It never wanted to destroy you. It wanted to protect you. It wanted to belong. The shadow doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be witnessed. It needs to be brought into the light of your compassion, not to be indulged, but to be understood. Because when it's seen without shame, it begins to transform. It becomes wisdom. It becomes depth. It becomes the bridge between your pain and your power. And that is where your healing begins, not by erasing the shadow, but by finally welcoming it home. The most important lesson from all of this is simple, yet deeply confronting. You can't live fully if you keep rejecting parts of yourself. We live in a culture that teaches us how to present, how to achieve, how to perform, but rarely how to feel, how to be whole, or how to welcome the contradictions that make us human. We're rewarded for control, for composure, for keeping things appropriate. But at what cost? Carl Jung's insight into the shadow, especially the sexual shadow, reveals that the very parts of ourselves we've labeled wrong or shameful are often the doorways to freedom. Your suppressed emotions, desires, and instincts aren't proof of your brokenness, they're signals. Messages from your deeper self saying, "Don't abandon me." The application in daily life is this: stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to know yourself. Pay attention to what triggers you, what you avoid, what you judge in others. Sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it. Get curious about your desires instead of moralizing them. Because healing doesn't come from becoming someone else, it comes from finally accepting who you are beneath all the masks. You don't need to become perfect. You need to become honest. And when you do, you stop living from fear. You stop chasing validation. You begin to move from a deeper place, one that feels grounded, whole, and real. That's the quiet revolution Jung spoke of. And it begins the moment you stop running from yourself.